Okay, thank you everyone for coming. No? Yeah, and for making it on this really, really hot day. So tonight is the fifth event of what we talk about when we talk about work, which is a series of discussions with curators and artists who are based in the north of the UK, together with invited speakers from different European cities. So these themed discussions are each hosted by a different northern art gallery and are being live broadcast, as well as archived by the contemporary art magazine This Is Tomorrow. So tonight's event at the Grundy Art Gallery in Blackpool takes the theme of staging and film sets. So speakers will explore artist practices that work with and at the intersection of film, installation and performance by considering the role of the site, context and event of curated film works. So film works that are often staged outside traditional viewing conventions. So how does a particular contextual staging of film works facilitate certain modes of encounter with both the film and the cited context of its screening? In which ways does it inform or extend an audience's individual or indeed collective experience of watching the film? So these are just some of the questions that will emerge throughout the talks this evening. But our first speaker is Paulette Terry Bryan, who's director of the Grundy, and she's going to introduce us to the gallery and the context a little bit of Blackpool. So the Grundy's current exhibition, A Clown Walks Into a Gallery, is a group show that brings together 5 internationally recognised contemporary artists whose works reference the act of performance, the role of disguise, and the line between fiction and fact. Considering a fluidity between fiction and reality, and between film and performance will be a further aspect that emerges throughout the speakers' presentations this evening. So following Paulette, filmmaker Chris Paul Daniels will discuss his recent work, Northern Lights, co-commissioned by the Grundy Art Gallery and ICA as part of the Art and Screen Network. The film originated from a residency with Light Up the North Network. So with a fictional future voice, Chris's film interrogates the tradition of the Illuminations, which is the annual light festival in Blackpool. The third speaker this evening, Will Rose, is director of Pavilion in Leeds. Will talk about staging from the point of view of reception, so looking at different modes of presentation for artists' moving image, from cinematic experiences to screenings in temporary spaces and the inherently social experience that each entails. Following Will, Annika Wick, who's joining us this evening from Stockholm, will discuss her recent work with Cinema Oki and Smart Creative Stat. Smart Creative Stat is Film Capital Stockholm's 5-year EU project, which runs from 2015 to 2020. And through a number of pilot studies, Smart Creative Stat used film and moving images in public space with the aim of determining how artistic expression, including moving images, can promote urban development. Our final speaker this evening, Poppy Bowers, is exhibition curator at the Whitworth in Manchester. Poppy will discuss No End to Enderby, a film installation by Graham Eater and Stephen Sutcliffe that was exhibited at the Whitworth Art Gallery as part of Manchester International Festival. So I'll introduce each speaker in a little bit more detail before their talk, and then following the presentations, there'll be an opportunity for questions at the end of the evening. But before we begin, I would like to thank everyone who's made today's event, as well as the whole series of talks possible. So the team at the Grundy, Raina and James at This Is Tomorrow, and the generous support of Arts Council England, Contemporary Visual Arts Network Northwest, Yorkshire and Humberside Visual Arts Network, North East Contemporary Visual Arts Network, and the participating venues of Middlesbrough Institute of Modern Art, Northern Gallery of Contemporary Art Sunderland, Blue Coat, Grundy Art Gallery, the Tetley and the Whitworth. So, Paulette.
So, as Laura said, welcome to, currently you're in the Brunswick room, which is in the Central Library, and for those who don't know, the Grundy Art Gallery is next door, and I'm the curator at the Grundy Art Gallery, been in post since November last year. And just a little bit of background about the Grundy, just thought it might be useful to say that the Grundy opened in 1911 and it's owned and operated by Blackpool Council, and it's a Grade 2 listed building along with the Central Library, which we're in now. And it was commissioned following a bequest of artworks from two local brothers, John and Cuthbert Grundy. And over the years, the collection has expanded and grown to include over 2,000 objects, which include painting, sculpture, photography, drawings, and a lot more. We have a year-round programme of exhibitions and events, and they follow the sort of seasonal ebb and flow of the town itself. So in the spring, we look at programming emerging artists and enabling our audiences to make new discoveries. In the summer, when Blackpool swells with holidaymakers and day trippers, we look at exhibitions which have perhaps a more wider public resonance. In the autumn, when the nights draw in and Blackpool illuminations start, we begin to focus on light as a thematic. And then in winter, when the crowds have left, we focus on artists who are living and working in Blackpool and along the Fylde coast. And we have an open exhibition, a local schools exhibition, and also a solo exhibition of an artist who's resident in Blackpool. But overarching this programming structure is an interest in sort of the unique qualities of Blackpool as site, drawing on its context and heritage, exploring the space between contemporary art, entertainment, and popular culture. And embedded within our vision is a commitment to providing a range of points of access to the programme. So yes, through the exhibitions, but also through our public programme and events, through our education work also. And hence our year-round talks programme that accompanies the exhibitions includes artist talks, workshops, exhibition tours, and off-site events, which brings us to today. And we're really, really delighted to be working with Laura Mansfield and This Is Tomorrow, who are live streaming today's event on This Is Tomorrow. And it's hosting this event. We're hosting this event as part of our summer exhibition programme. And as Laura said, it comprises 4 separate exhibitions, A Clown Walks into a Gallery being one of those, and each of those exhibitions directly and indirectly looks at some of the themes, images and ideas of circus. This year is the 250th anniversary of circus emerging in the UK, and we're part of a UK-wide project that's celebrating that anniversary. So the exhibitions include The Clown Walks into a Gallery, which is the group exhibition, alongside the Blackpool Museum Project exhibition, which looks at the history of Blackpool Tower Circus through its archives and collections. A solo show upstairs by Claire Griffiths, who's a locally based photographer, who's working on a 12-month project called the Retired Performers Project. And then a solo show of a photographer called Peter Lavery, who's been documenting circus for over 50 years, and that's a short snapshot of some of that larger body of work. So today will be part of, thank you, today will be part of that bigger programme of events, public programme events that we have at the gallery. And just to let you know a little bit more about what's coming up in this talks and event programme, on Saturday we have a walk and talk tour from 3 till 5, 28th of July, with Claire Griffiths on her Retired Performers project. On the 13th and the 16th of August we have some circus workshops for families and children aged 7 and above. On the 18th of August, we're going to welcome Matty Faint, who is a clown, who's been a clown for 40 years, and also the curator of the Clowns Gallery and Museum in London, who's going to talk about his work as a clown and his wider curatorial work. But beyond that, I've just got a few housekeeping things to say. So we're in the Brunswick room, and we're not expecting any kind of fire alarm test. So if the fire alarms do go out, this is the fire exit this way or the fire exit this way. They'll both lead you out either onto Abingdon Street or onto Queen Street here. Also, there's some water here. If anybody would like any, please help yourself. So again, just to say thank you very much for coming and making it this afternoon. And again to Laura for proposing the project to us. And of course to the speakers who Laura's going to introduce. So thank you very much.
Okay, so our first speaker is Chris Paul Daniels. Chris is an artist and filmmaker based in Manchester His work is characterised by experimental documentation of communal perspectives and memories regarding geographical location. His work is regularly screened internationally, and he's made work in and about Kenya, China, Iceland, Sweden and the Netherlands. He graduated from the Royal College of Art in 2010 and co-won the Deutsche Bank Award for Art with Maria Anatisu for Unravel, the longest hand-painted film in Britain. Chris is currently a lecturer at Manchester School of Art and also hosts regular screenings at the Grundy here as part of the ICA Artist Moving Image Film Club programme. So, Chris.
Okay, I'll just start this so I don't run over. Okay. So I'm just going to start with a little overview of my practice and talk about different ways in which I've perhaps performed plays to the camera. And I'm going to end with like a 3-minute clip from this co-commission, Northern Lights, which is about based around the Blackpool illuminations, so related to here. Yeah, in terms of my own interests, I'm interested in films that kind of go in on themselves, perhaps are reflexive, reference kind of filmmaking. Heroes of mine include John Smith. He made a film called The Girl Chewing Gum, and I think it was made in response to realising that extras and locations weren't accidentally within the frame. They were kind of, there's a choice by the filmmaker to put them there and to manipulate in different ways. Duck Amuck, Chuck Jones, Daffy Duck kind of interacting with himself in the film and kind of like looking at different kind of things of the materiality of film, but in a humorous way. And then perhaps David Hall, who in 1971 did the television interruptions that were just broadcast unannounced on Scottish TV. So kind of a tap filling the cube of the TV in the room. Or Richard Baker, who's a famous TV presenter, repeating the same things and being re-recorded and distorted. Really important thing for me that shows my age is Ghostwatch. It was a 1992 hoax broadcast by the BBC in which the ghost actually manipulates and edits the film. So it's like the ghost is literally in the machine. So these things of like literally kind of like breaking down the fourth wall or kind of going in on the film and acknowledging that it's manipulated have kind of always stayed with me. When I graduated from the RCA with Maria Anastasio, we won the Deutsche Bank Award. It was a 10 grand prize, and we toured workshops around the UK with cameraless film. That took us 100 different places in the UK, and actually took us to New York. There's 5 of us involved at that point with Joe Byrne and Mark Pickles and Kelvin Brown. But we went to the Whitney, and we took a metric response to film, as if every frame of film equaled a metre, and we measured Land's End to John O'Groats. So it's kind of like a tape measure, transforming the film reel into like a measuring device, but literally like a tapestry that people could manipulate and take from one location to the next. So that kind of was my starting point with making films in response to place. I was really fortunate to do a Gasworks residency in Nairobi, and this should just play. I was there in 2013 when there was a presidential elections taking place, and the technique to sort of get your face literally plastered across the city was very literal. And so this is my friend Paul Untitled, who's a great artist, driving me around Nairobi and me just pulling the focus. So essentially taking the city as kind of like a zoetrope, and this isn't manipulated in the edit, it's just a straight observation and changing the focus. So kind of taking those posters as if they look like animation. I'll switch this just for time. In 2015, I was commissioned by Home in Manchester. It was a specific brief to make work in response to Todd Haynes' film Safe, which uses a lot of it's a critique on the industry around the self-help industry in America. And I did it was the first time I did a scripted work as a commission. I got the curator, Sarah Perks, to be the voiceover. So it was presented like an audio guide to the exhibition, but it's actually used in a lot of institutional corporate language to say, acknowledge it as a brand new art space, perhaps pretending it as the transformative space. So I also did a kind of short film with mannequins. And there was a live 0845 telephone number that if you rang the box office, but it was presented like the art centre was going to literally transform you. And then again in 2016, me and Sam Meach made a film called 1 Square Mile that was taking 1 literal square mile of Salford around Media City. It was commissioned by someone in Media City, Keys Culture, and University of Salford. And we took different absurdist techniques to kind of measure in that geographical location, presenting it like a kind of property developer, advertisement almost, an authoritative voiceover that presented different ways in which would help you regenerate that area, because that 1 square mile of Salford has massive spikes in wealth. It's Media City, it has Old Trafford football ground, but equally different estates around that. So again, we were just playing with the kind of authority of the this specific video to take quite absurdist techniques and randomly throw a square quadrant into measuring the area. That also had a voiceover. I'm not playing that because I've used the same voiceover actress who's really great, called Alicia Prowse, in the Blackpool film, so you'll hear in a second. But again, just playing, overtly manipulating, overtly kind of creating an unreliable narrator, and that's where my work's kind of gone towards now. I think I'm quite into humour and wordplay and kind of puns coming into the voiceover, and again, thinking back to someone like John Smith, who's really sort of done this stuff since the 70s. So I'm going to talk now just for 5 minutes about Northern Lights. It was originated from a residency at Lightworks, which probably a lot of you do know, where the Blackpool illuminations are stored and maintained and built. And there's a great team there. I was really fortunate with Light Up the North Network to spend like 2 weeks there last year. And I started shooting on digital and actually realised I needed to be using film. So this film is all my own footage. It's all Super 8 and 16mm film, but it's presented in a very kind of quite absurdist technique that, like, as if someone from the future has found my archive and kind of took the Blackpool illuminations to be literal. Like, these are kind of centres of worship or centres of kind of old gods, or kind of completely confused, completely interrogating what are they for, hopefully asking some questions that are my own, but equally just trying to understand what Blackpool illuminations and what Blackpool might be. So I'll play this, hopefully it'll play.
Built. We gather, the life essence is strong. Kids eat free. Everyone's a winner and on fair ground. You've played your tarot cards right and let the penny drop. Hooked a duck onto something dear to the many, not the few. There are many high and strong spirits, but a great drift between us and them. We learnt of the stretch of the imagination and the activity centres of the Pilgrim's Trail, beacons of prosperity, totems to bring the moths to the flames to appease the market forces, the reservations of the Standing Order, a pantheon larger than life for all ages, from Arteo, Atarapa and Hyperion, for Bast, Ra and we, Apollo, Hermes, Nike, looking for Valhalla, Arcadia and the Coral Islands in the sun. Some documents remain of the sacrificial offerings, the brief idols used as vessels to switch on the powerful source. In faith, to be revered as celestial bodies and proclaimed as tributes to the gods of light. Perhaps in hope for plentiful seasons to ward off the black pools of darkness. Their status is lost to us, but some records remain of a Danny LaRue in 1972, a Wendy Craig in 1974, Cannon and Ball in 1980, Chris de Burgh 1998, Dale Winton, 2006, and what appear to be more abstract dedications to Red Rum in 1977, to The Dad's Army in 1971, to Steps 2001, The Eternal in 1996, and The Status Quo in 1993, all notable conduits and torchbearers of the Northern Lights. Chosen as the divine light of kings or queens of hearts of their moment, you aligned your stars with majesty and a brief seat at the tableau. We wonder, do you still stare into the sun? If you look into the mirror, do you see a distortion? Do you follow the star or open the mail? Is there a guardian left? Or do you seek redemption with the one-armed bandit? We see special guests cast an alien gaze on unidentified flying handbags, cups and saucers. Few remain, many leave. Are these sacred or cash cows? And here...
That's my clip for today, but it is a 13 and a half minute film, which hopefully you'll see in the autumn. But yeah, so in terms of like presenting my own observations, I think that comes from trying to do more with the Unravel project. We were documenting each place, we were trying to collect stories, we were trying to collect questions about what was good or what was bad to live in Leeds or Bristol or Glasgow. And now it's much more kind of filtered through my lens and through my kind of observations, but presenting that in a quite absurd way and deliberately playful, deliberately humorous, hopefully, but unreliable, and sort of the ways in which that could be misinterpreted. But in terms of today's discussion and staging and film sets, I think a lot of people in Blackpool have told me just the idea of the seafront as a set in itself, and we've just had a little wander around for an hour, and it's a remarkable environment. It's a remarkable set of architecture and oddities and text and embedded wordplay into the landscape. You know, you have the comedy carpet, but I was also thinking how the words like Nike, Hermes, Apollo, Arcadia can drift, and kind of different meaning can be attached in different kind of generations. Kids eat free sounds really idyllic, but it might be referencing the casino around the corner. So, and yeah, just how interesting Blackpool is to me. I have a long history of coming here as a visitor, with my family. I have this kind of hereditary kind of love for the place, but it's equally not the people who live here's place. You know, it's a different kind of interpretation. So I've used this kind of tool of like an alien gaze or a visitor from another place as everything's kind of literal and fantastical, because there is a lot here to be treasured, and just this long list of people that are the people that switch on the Blackpool lights. I've took that as if it's almost like a human sacrifice, or this kind of Wicker Man-esque kind of tradition of who have we got? Jonathan Ross in 2013, or Steps perhaps. But you know, how can things be misinterpreted and unreliable has definitely become something in part of my practice. The last line in the film, not to spoil it, is what does the future hold against you? Because I've been playing with the idea that it's like almost a psychic broadcast or an astral projection from the future, and that's why it's using film in a photochemical, alchemical sense. So again, playing on some of the things that are in Blackpool with fortune tellers and palm readers that aren't necessarily in Manchester where I live, or Rotherham where I'm from. It's I think I've been using bits that I've observed in my time in Blackpool, and regularly had access to people from doing some of the ICA screenings that we've done here. But yeah, I'm really interested in speaking to people after about what you make of it, and hopefully you get to see the full film later in the year. So I think that's my time, isn't it? And we'll have the panel after, so there's a bit more room then. Okay.
Thank you. So our next speaker is Will Rose, and Will is Director of Pavilion, a visual arts organisation based in Leeds. For the last 15 years, he's worked primarily in the field of artist moving image as a producer, researcher and programmer. He's produced moving image projects with artists including Luke Fowler, Mark Fell and Auriel Fromont, and is currently working on Pavilion projects with Stephen Sutcliffe, Margaret Salmon and George Clark. He's recently completed editing a collection of writings by Ken Jacobs, one of the pioneers of personal filmmaking in America.
I'm going to sit down if that's okay, so I can read some notes. But thanks, Laura, for the invitation. So I'd like to approach the subject of staging from the perspective of the presentation of artist moving image rather than its production. So to think about the screening itself as a type of setting which frames the work and changes radically depending on where it's taking place. So in particular, I'd like to concentrate on the kind of event-based mode of presentation or film presentation, film screenings, where people gather at the same time and place to watch something together, as opposed to gallery installations, which to me often, but not always, kind of offer, I think, a more fragmented, less synchronized and sometimes less social relationship between viewers and moving image work. So screenings reduce the moving image presentation to its sort of base elements, which have been the mainstay of cinema since the advent of film. So the basic components of a screen, a projector of some kind, and hopefully some people to watch it. And these basic elements can turn any space into a kind of provisional cinema. And as the early kind of show people of cinema demonstrated, this apparatus can be moved between halls, fairs, theatres, homes, and so on. And in fact, prior to the industrialization of cinema film presentation was this kind of portable, provisional, temporary experience that took place in different sort of ready-made settings. So although the film industry was kind of quick to build cinemas to exploit the potential to make money from this new medium, a more kind of fugitive mode of film presentation has endured, one which is more provisional, more portable, often exists in gaps. And I think it's important to remember that moving image in the gallery is actually a relatively new phenomena which really only took hold from the 90s onwards. And prior to that, what is now commonly referred to as artist moving image wasn't really part of the institutions of art as much. Existed in this other way that I'm describing, which is on the margins, in the spaces between, in the underground, in appropriated spaces, cinematheques, film collectives and cooperatives, and in education settings, back rooms, and so on. So for me, artist moving image is not just a kind of area of practice. It's a whole history of alternative moving image culture that extends back to the advent of film and defines not only particular kinds of work, but also particular ways of watching. So I suppose what I'm trying to do is sort of put forward the idea that this way of presenting artists' moving image is a particular type of staging in and of itself. And the artist and theorist Peter Gidal has this idea that a film is only completed once it's shown, thereby placing the meaning of the film somewhere between what's on the screen and how it's received by an individual viewer on a particular occasion in a particular context. And this is an idea that I think was really succinctly described by the late Ian White, who was an artist, a writer and a curator of artist film. So he was interested in the screening as the site of a very particular interaction between film and viewer, and he likened this peculiar kind likened this to a peculiar kind of performance, which often involves films and viewers and a setting or context. So it's kind of a live situation, even if the film is in itself is not involving live components of any sort. And this is an idea that I've found really inspiring, because it sort of tries to describe something particularly unique and unrepeatable that can happen when a certain type of film is shown in a particular way, like a live act or a piece of performance, or even like a conversation, that it will never really be the same. So never really appear that same way again. So I'm interested in sort of what constitutes this rather ambiguous type of engagement with film, and how such temporary situations can be produced both inside and outside the institutions of art and cinema, and how it can be used to effectively bring people together. So there are a few Pavilion projects that I wanted to briefly talk about with these ideas in mind, and these are all projects that happened because Pavilion isn't a gallery. It doesn't have a space of its own. So the first project, which was from a few years ago, these are two stills from the film, was a cinema project called 9 Intervals, made with a French artist called Aurélien Frémont. He made a series of 9 episodic films that were designed specifically to be shown unannounced in the gap between the adverts and feature films in conventional cinema programs. So we first presented this project at the Hyde Park Picture House in Leeds, where each episode was shown for 1 week before a particular feature. So the project kind of occupied, had a presence in the cinema's program for several weeks. The films themselves were all they're about 5 minutes long each, but they're all about the relationship between the viewer and the screen, and the space that you occupy as a viewer. And more specifically, they focused on the chair that you sit on as you watch the film, as a kind of common object that would be in any of the spaces that it was presented in. So this object, which is common to all cinemas, was used as a kind of prop to talk about the role of the person sitting in it at the moment of watching. So the films covered topics including chair design, manufacture and testing, things like posture, how to sit properly, which is the still on the right there, and another episode was a kind of yoga exercise for the audience. So it went on to be shown in 10 cinemas across the UK, where it reached I think over 20,000 people over the course of a year, by effectively kind of hijacking a mainstream screening situation. Next project was a project that actually my colleague from a few years ago, Lindsay Stovers, produced for Pavilion. It was a commission with the artist Lucy Skeyer. It was called Film for an Abandoned Projector. So Lucy was interested in the fact that in the 20s, 30s and 40s, Leeds was an important centre for the manufacture of 35mm film projectors. There was a company there called Kershaw and Sons that manufactured Cayley projectors that were used all over the world in cinemas. And Lucy wanted to find a Cayley projector that had been abandoned but left in situ. And then she wanted to make a film that would be shown on that projector, wherever it was. So the film, which was silent, would be kind of like the projector playing out its subconscious after sitting abandoned for 30 years. So we found 2 projectors in a cinema in Armley, or a cinema that used a previous cinema in Armley called The Lyric, which had closed in 1980 and had become a factory, and then had become a church for an African Christian group. The building had changed quite a bit, but the projection room was left intact. You can see it at the bottom of the screen there. So the project became about kind of appropriating this former cinema, now a church, to temporarily show Lucy's film. So we took a wall down so we could get the projection beam back through into the main space. The projectors were repaired, a screen was erected, and we opened it for screenings of her work several times each week. And simultaneously between us showing her work, it was also still being used as a church. So Lucy was sort of clear that the film that she made should only ever be screened in that space on those projectors. And in fact, the same print was used throughout the duration of the entire project, so it gradually became very worn from the marks of its sort of history of being shown there. So Armley, which is where the cinema is based, is a really interesting, diverse suburb of Leeds, and the project engaged the people who lived there, some of whom used to go to that cinema when it was operating. So this kind of gesture of reopening a building meant different things to people, and it had a very powerful kind of socializing function in the area. So it was art, but it was also a way of bringing a community together, as the cinema had done previously. And interestingly, going back to this idea of early cinema, it was also work that was as much about the sort of technical apparatus as it was about the film itself, which was the case with a lot of early cinema screenings. People went as much to watch the machines as they did to watch the film. So in this piece at the Lyric, people could move between the projection room and the auditorium to watch the work in different ways. So just moving on to another area of Pavilion's work. So as an organisation that doesn't have a space and isn't a destination as such, we have to think a lot about how we establish contact with people, how we engage with people, and on what terms we engage with people. And we've produced a number of screenings in which we've very consciously tried to think about what we present in relation to where it's presented. So this is a flyer for a project called The Problem of Perspective from a year or so ago, which was a series of 10 screenings across the north of England that looked at the different histories of alternative film and video making in those places. So there were screenings in Sheffield, Leeds, Bradford, Kendal, Manchester, Doncaster, Hull, Rotherham, Newcastle. And what we tried to do is make very direct kind of geographical correlations between the work we showed and where we showed it. So we did lots of research and unearthed some really great work, but rarely seen work that was made sort of in the areas around each of the places that we did screenings in. And in some cases sort of showed it in those places for the first time. So I mentioned that project because for me this idea of staging extends into kind of considering what the work might mean to people in different places, and very often this isn't thought about, and assumptions are made about what this kind of audience as a singular thing might be, if you find it's very different, obviously, in different places. So just to finish with. I wanted to mention a project that we're planning at the moment, which is still in its early stages. It's a collaboration with artist and curator called George Clark, who's from West Yorkshire, and an arts collective called the Jatiwangi Art Factory, who are based in a small village in rural Indonesia in West Java. So for the last 10 years, Jatiwangi Art Factory have produced a project called Village Video Festival, in the area where they live and work. It's quite remote, but there are lots of people that live there. And the idea of kind of art and culture in that area has come to revolve around the activities of Jatiwangi Art Factory exclusively. So Village Video Festival involves artists producing videos in the local community over the course of 2 weeks. It's a project that kind of collapses processes of making and showing work, and therefore eliminates this gulf that can exist between the work and the person watching it. So the audience for the work are the people that made it, or the subjects of the work that's been shown. And their ethos it's really simple, but it's really great, and they believe that you don't really work with the community when you are the community, which is a really interesting provocation, I think. So what we're planning to do is to try to work with Jatiwangi Art Factory to apply this village video model in an entirely different context for the first time in West Yorkshire rather than West Java. So there'll be a kind of concentrated period of production involving moving image artists and people who live and work across different parts of West Yorkshire, and it will result in sort of various community screenings of the work that's made during that period. So that's me kind of finished. The one final thing, actually, I've been talking about Pavilion not having a space, and in fact that's not quite true. We've just about to move into a space, actually, that we'll be occupying for the next couple of years in collaboration with the Hyde Park Picture House, which is a cinema in Leeds, which is also closing next year for a big renovation project. And this is a still from, we did a screening last night. We do an artist meeting each month for moving image artists based in Leeds. So we're still kind of thinking through, having not had a space as an organisation for 10 years, thinking through what it means to have a very modestly sized space that we will be using primarily for moving image work, for a kind of hybrid program of screenings, meetings, events. So it's sort of unresolved how the next couple of years will play out, but that's something sort of where we're at the moment with in terms of our work. Thank you very much.
So the next speaker is Annika Wick. Annika holds a PhD from the Department of Cinema Studies in Stockholm University, and currently she works independently with research and development within the field of film and contemporary art, conducting projects for Film Region Stockholm, Mälardalen, and the Swedish Film Institute. She also teaches at Konstfack, the University College of Arts, Craft and Design in Stockholm. Between 2007 and 2012, she was working with research-based issues for the independent art producer MAP, which is Mobile Art Production. She's currently she's co-editor of the books Imagining the Audience, Viewing Positions in Artistic and Curatorial Practice, and Mobile Art Production. Since 2016, she's chairman of the board for Film Form, Art, Film and Video Archive in Stockholm.
Okay, so let's see if you hear. Can you hear me loud enough now? Is it loud enough? Thank you so much for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here. I realized it was 30 years ago since I was in Manchester last time, so it was about time to go back again. Thanks for the nice introduction. I am, as you said, Laura, an independent scholar. I work with research and development within the field of film and contemporary art. But I'm here today to talk about a pilot study, which is a part of this 5-year-old EU project that you mentioned, Smart Creative Stad or Smart Creative City. And within this project, I function as it's called an ongoing evaluation consultant, or a researcher. And what it means to be ongoing is that I follow all these different pilot studies that we work with before, during, and after. And I'm here to talk about number 8 in the series of 12. And that study is based on a concept that we developed in another context in 2016. It was me and 2 colleagues, Ingrid Ryberg and Ulrika Bandeira. And I brought this poster. It's really difficult to see here. And that shows all the different film scenes that you could participate in then in Stockholm. But that's another project. But the concept itself, Cinemaoke, is for cinema what music, karaoke is for music. It allows you to step into a film sequence played in a loop by actors. So it's entirely up to you what role you like to take as an audience. You could be an observer, you could be a participant in some parts, or you can really get involved. There are strict and really clear instructions of how to interact. And with a little specific thing like if you put a flower behind your ear, someone can flirt with you. Or if you walk up to this actor, you can ask to play that actor's role. So it's really up to you how much you like to participate. And there's no hierarchy between that. It's not better to interact. So much can happen within someone just being there and take part anyway. So that Smart Creative Stad, as I said, is a 5-year-old project, and we have a website that you can look at if you like. I also brought little folders if someone is interested. That is unfortunately in Swedish, but the website is a part of it, or there's an English part of it. So you can look into all the different pilot studies that's been taking place since 2016 here. And this is number 8 where we are at the moment. But the purpose of the whole project is to explore how film and moving images can promote urban development. So we have a couple of purposes that we're trying and testing and seeing how we can work with moving images and film within city planning. Who do we need to work with, and what can we, from a very concrete with concrete purposes, like what needs to be changed or thought of when we build and when we plan cities. That could be simple things like special surfaces, or how do we need to think about electricity, and things like that. But then on the other end of that scale, from the very concrete to the more abstract, is how it affects us with film and moving images in our city spaces. Collaborations between culture and business is another thing, and then how we can think of the skills from the film branch, how that could sort of be used, or how we can collaborate with the film branch and other branches. Okay, so this I could talk very much about next time I'll be back. But here, we were supposed to do something for this summer, around midsummer, when this special event is taking place, Almedalen Week, on Gotland, an island in Sweden. This year is election year in Sweden, so there's a lot going on, and the political situation in Sweden, as in many places in Europe, is complicated, to say the least. It is also the centennial of Ingmar Bergman, the filmmaker, so we had 100-year Bergman to celebrate as well, and he used to live and practice on Gotland, so we had a couple of things to sort of get together. So Almedalen, it's a nice island where people go on holiday, very different from here. But it started 50 years ago exactly with the Prime Minister Olof Palme starting to give speeches on his holidays, because he used to have a summer house there. And it turned into Sweden's most important political space. So every summer this is an arena meant for democracy. So politicians and citizens meet in public space on this holiday island, or of course people live there as well. And we wanted to take part in this and explore another type of space than the space you think of when we talk about urban planning with houses, streets, and all that sort of hardcore city things. We wanted to see what we could do in an urban space that was, for the time, meant to be our arena for democracy. So with this, let's see, sorry. We went from, in Smart Creative Stad, large-scale projections to local screenings, site-specific events, participatory-based projects, and events where we are, as you were talking about just interested in reception. When we talk about urban planning and when we talk about the urban development, we are interested in seeing how does this land within, with the citizens. Like, for example, what spaces are used or underused for whom, and try to see what we can do there. So in Almedalen, taking place on this political arena in Visby, we decided to work on Bergman movies, and we wanted to show instead of tell. Instead of the seminar where we would tell how important it is with film and culture, or we did that as well, but to complement that with showing instead of telling. So in an extremely ambitious project, we did this queer Bergman Cinema. So based on thoroughly research, very much of Ingrid Ryberg's research as a film scholar, we worked for an interactive performance with the audience consisting of politicians and citizens being in this space. We wanted them to step into a piece of history of sexual politics, seen through the lens of Ingmar Bergman's films. So he was a filmmaker that explored sexuality during his whole life, and there are plenty of queer characters in his films, and we wanted to get them out of the closet. So the performance is called Imitations Cinema in the Bergmanian Closet. So scenes from 1944 till 1982 were in different rooms in a building, a completely different empty building. We were to set up scenography, light, and sound. So when I say from 1944 to 1982, we started in 1944 when Bergman also made the film Torment, when homosexuality is decriminalized. Through years when scenes with homosexuality were censored, to 1979 when the stigma of mental disease stamp finally expunged, but not leaving it unproblematic at all. So, going from different rooms, from 40, 50, 60, 70, and 80, it was like exploring sexual politics within this special arena based on Bergman's film, which is usually associated with heterosexual sexuality. So it was quite amazing to enter this room when the scenographer, the light technician, and the sound technician had done there, because it was completely empty, and we weren't allowed even to use a nail in the wall. So they did an amazing job. And I would like to mention Ulrika Bandeira with the artistic leadership here as well. So there were scenes and rooms, spaces built up for imagination and built up for immersion. It was a cast of 10 actors, amazing actors, directed by Ingrid Ryberg. All these actors with important experience, great understanding and knowledge of queerness in different ways. So Torment from 44 was the first film that you stepped in after you met Grandma from Fanny and Alexander. And this is sort of a test for you now, how well you know your Ingmar Bergman. After that, you went into Three Strange Loves from 1949, a very sort of 1950s sense. And I brought the censorship card as an example of the research. On the censorship card, it tells you that one of the pieces that were cut away was cut away because of the homosexual invite, where one of the female characters is approaching the other female characters. So, and in the scene, there are two different sets in the same room. So the audience goes from a ballet scene to a room where there's a seduction scene going on. And when they start dancing, and when we were getting closer to this seduction or the love scene, it goes black. And you hear from the speakers what is written on the censorship card. So after Three Strange Loves, you go to Persona, and then to From Life of the Marionettes from 1980. And here's another example of how one room was divided into two scenes. So to the left, you have a character from here, from Great Britain, Robin Wood, a film critic, very important for Bergman research. And on the other side, you have not the couple, you have Katerina, who's in another heterosexual relationship, and Tim, an openly gay character. So this is from 1980, sorry. I thought we'd just stop here for a minute to see what happens in this room. So we have totally different atmosphere in the scene where we have Robin Wood giving us a lecture and telling us about his research and his private life and how that is affected by the life of the marionettes through his whole life. And then we click over and we get a completely different light, and it's flickering, so it's like a sense of being in a film scene. And we have a dialogue between Katerina and Tim, ending up with Tim walking up to the mirror. I think you see a little bit of the light there, but it's difficult to catch in a single image. We have Tim sitting in front of the mirror in a monologue, a very sort of self-hatred monologue, a very painful monologue to watch. And I'm stopping here just to say that this is an example of how you could, as an audience, step in. Because behind there, we have the mirror, and then we have a frame. So if you want to, you could go up here, and you could be Tim's reflection. So you get earphones, and you hear what you're supposed to say, and you stand in front of him. And the scene ends with, in the film, that Tim asks Katerina to hold his hand and put it on his, and hold it like this. And when you are interacting, Katerina is holding both of the hands. And it ends with, can you feel my hand? Can you feel that it's me? And she goes, yes first, and then no. And it's a very powerful scene to take part of, to enter and understand in a more profound way what that feels like, what he's sort of, how he deals with this. So talking about reception, it's very interesting for me as a scholar to observe and walk around this space and see what happens to people, how it affects them and how it moves them. And some people just stay in the room when it goes on and on and on, and they just last in the room for a long time. Okay. After this, you're invited into Fanny and Alexander, and the grandmother that meets you in the beginning of this performance and who gives you the story of everything, so that you get greater understanding what you're supposed to do. She invites you in and say, okay, it's nice when the party is over, we can all be ourselves in this room. And she reads poems for you, so you can just stay in this room. And the housemaid tells you that you can go up and meet the dangerous character locked in a Bergman film, and you can have a private session with Ismail, this very androgynous? Yeah, thanks. I won't say after. Okay, the whole performance ended every night with a group photo, and that photo was different every night. So, and that's up to the audience if they want to be in the photo or not, or if they just want to leave. Everything is very sort of voluntarily, and nothing is sort of forced at you. As I said, it was really interesting follow the whole process. And I just wanted to end to say what I think the project made us see. It's really important to see what we can accomplish with culture in a space like this, when everything is so much about conflict and sort of telling things from your position. And when showing instead of telling, it invites you with your own experience, perhaps re-experience things, but also to test someone else's experience, just temporarily. And how film works this way. Film is such an efficient medium to test other people's experiences and to get immediate identification. And you can be and stay in this identification for a short while. And how this was sort of what we wanted to experience or experiment with. Like, what can we do with this? So in these times when the LGBTQ rights are under pressure very much, we thought we needed to offer a situation where we can understand each other, to test that. And when it comes to city planning, urban development, it's so important to understand how many different ways there are of living a life, and also just as important, how many similarities there are. So, like this as a safe space, really, really important that this wasn't a separatistic room, but this was for other people to come in and experience what is it so important to experience. So, how we gain very little to hold on to positions? No, we need to test other positions. And we wanted to tell and wanted to show the power of film, the intellectual, emotional, and political power of film. So, important effects of this: to trust imagination, to trust immersion, and to trust temporarily identification when trying to be visionary when it comes to what, when we really want change. Thank you.
Our final speaker this evening is Poppy Bowers. Poppy is exhibitions curator at the Whitworth in Manchester, and she previously worked as assistant curator at the Whitechapel in London and exhibitions coordinator at the Wellcome Collection. In 2015, she founded Muse Studio, which is an itinerant project space for contemporary art rooted in the idea of the studio as a test site.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Laura, and thanks to Paulette and Grundy Art Gallery. It's really nice to be here and to be part of this. So as Laura said, yeah, I'm exhibition curator, at the Whitworth, got it right. And my role is really working mainly with invited artists on realising exhibitions. And that often consists of a new commission. So today I'm going to focus on one specific project that involved making and presenting artist film, where film sets and ideas of staging were intrinsic to the exhibition and to the film work itself. The exhibition was titled No End to Enderby, and it consisted of a new two-part film by Glasgow-based artists Stephen Sutcliffe and Graham E. Tuff. Let me get on to this. This is an in-store shot. I have a habit of leaving in all credits and captions to my images. So yeah, this initial film proposal won the Contemporary Art Society Annual Award back in 2015, and it was jointly commissioned by the Whitworth, Manchester International Festival, and Glasgow International. So we presented it at the Whitworth last summer, but some of you may have encountered it in Glasgow earlier this year. in the spring, and there it was presented in a building called Film City, which was a former town hall. And so it had a whole other life in a sort of, in this sort of historic building, which would be in a whole other talk. So today I'm just going to concentrate on the Manchester installation. So this is the first work that Stephen and Graham have created, like co-created together. They both have separate practices. Stephen is an artist who works primarily in video, often using, collage technique to rework material from an archive of TV and radio footage. He's really interested in the interview scenario and has made several works that use material from recorded interviews with famous writers usually, but also actors. And in doing this, he looks at the way in which they present themselves and this idea of the shift in one's mannerisms or body language as they move on and off camera. So he's interested in this sort of on-off stage personality. And Graham is known first and foremost as a theatre director, but his work spans the borders of theatre and contemporary art, and he's collaborated with artists such as Graham Fagan and Simon Starling to create performances and installations. And he's particularly interested in the similarities between theatre and the play and the gallery and the exhibition, as both being places where techniques of storytelling and character construction are kind of brought into play. Hopefully that's it. Okay. I'll leave you to do that. I don't break it. So yeah, these joint interests underpin the exhibition that they came to do at the Whitworth. So Stephen and Graham decided to come together to respond to the writings and the persona of Anthony Burgess, the sort of great Manchester literary hero. He's widely known as being the author of Clockwork Orange, but they were interested in looking at his lesser-known works, which is a series of 4 novels known as the Enderby series. And these are 4 novels that sort of follow the sort of celebrated but rather shambolic life of a poet called Enderby, who is said to be Burgess's alter ego. And what Burgess does in the novels is he brings in elements of his own life, anecdotes and places and times into the story. And what's interesting about Burgess is not only does he use his own life as materials in his novels, but he also fictionalizes his own biography. And so you can see that in his writing, in recorded interviews, whether on chat shows or radio interviews, where he changes dates or he changes sort of events, and it's very hard to decipher what is actually real and accurate in his sort of career and in his life. And he plays with that theatricality, he plays with it. So this was an important kind of starting point for Stephen and Graham. So with the film, the Enderby novels, Burgess wrote a sort of 2 standalone chapters, a sort of prologue to the first book and then an epilogue to the final and 4th book. And these are kind of 2 short stories that kind of stand alone in their own right. They're sort of short sci-fi stories that use time travel to look at the legacy of 2 famous writers and to call into question the sort of authenticity of their work and the sort of ways in which their legacy and the way in which their work has been historicised. So these 2 short stories are the films that Stephen and Graham went on to make. They decided to just make straight film adaptations of these 2 stories. So they chose to film them very much in the style of sort of 1980s televised theatre plays, drawing from that sort of very imaginative period in British TV, which saw programmes such as The Play for Today and televised Shakespeare adaptations, but being sort of pre-digital, pre-kind of special effects, they very much showed their workings with the sort of wobbly sets and the very obvious kind of prosthetics. So shows like Blake 7 and The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy were sort of reference points for Stephen and Graham in this process. So this is a shot of us filming the first film. So it was filmed in a theatre, and that was important, again, to some of the ideas and conceptual ideas in the work.
This is filmed at the Royal Exchange Theatre, which for those of you, I don't know, who are not familiar with it, it's a brilliant piece of architecture. It's like a glass capsule that's just sat in this huge Victorian building, which was the former cotton exchange. So it's out of time in itself. It kind of feels it. So it plays very nicely with this idea of being a time-travelling capsule. And the story is that this school group, who are stood around in these tartan skirts, are a school group from the future who travel back to the 1960s to the bedsit of the poet Enderby. He's asleep at night, a poet they're studying in their sort of curriculum, and it's led by the school teacher. So it's kind of like a sort of English literature sort of class in the future. So you can see that we worked with the Royal Exchange Theatre not just on getting the location and all the lighting and the technicians, but also it was a collaborative project where they produced the sets for us. They did all the makeup, and the costume, and it was very important that we were working with a professional team and sort of the expertise that sort of come with that. You can see that the set is only partially built. So in the film, what you have is when the walls of are not there, you just have this sort of dark backdrop of the theatre itself. So that sort of comes into play in certain shots. We worked with professional actors, like Johnny Betts is the school teacher, but we also worked with non-professional actors. So the school group were actually students from the Savarian College in Manchester, which was where Anthony Burgess studied. So again, that idea of biography coming in and out of the film, and that followed through into the set. So the set is, is made to sort of mimic the 60s bedsit, and you can see that some of it's very artificial. But there's one item which is a typewriter just by the bath there, which is, one could say, an authentic object. It's Anthony Burgess's typewriter that we borrowed from the International Anthony Burgess Foundation. So again, there's a bit of playing there. I'll move on. So the second film was then shot in a television studios. This was Old Granada TV Studios. It's now out of action, but you can hire. And this is called The Muse, and this sort of story follows a literary historian from the future who travels back to Elizabethan England to visit Shakespeare to find out whether he actually did write the plays he's celebrated for writing. So as you can see, we used this theatre flats. We worked with Royal Exchange Theatre again, and produced these sort of what looked like a Elizabethan lodging. But again, what the artists did was they worked also with the apparatus and the architecture of the TV studios. So shots come in and out of being in next to a sort of lead glass window, Elizabethan window, and then suddenly you're walking through the corridors behind backstage, and these thin corridors suddenly become a metaphor for these narrow Elizabethan streets. So this shot, for example, is a dialogue that's happening that's meant to be in a sort of tavern, and this is actually happening in the dressing room and the TV studios. So you're sort of slipping in and out of this Elizabethan stage sets to the workings of a 21st century TV studio. So in both films, the setting and the locations and I guess the mechanisms of filmmaking and theatre production are laid bare. So that gives you a flavour of what the content of the two films. So how did that sort of follow through into the exhibition? So this is an install shot of one of the rooms in the Whitworth. So we decided, we always knew we were going to present the film, and that was going to be screened, and we knew it was going to be a projection. But the other elements sort of developed throughout the process of making the films. And we decided there were two spaces that we used in the end, and there were two very different spaces. As if anyone knows the Whitworth, it has different kind of architectural histories. So this is a very low-ceilinged 1960s sort of modernist space with the walnut panelling at the back. So we decided in here to install the set, so to keep the original sets and bring back the props, not all of it, just parts of it. And they were kind of fragmented and sort of mixed together. So you would have, Shakespeare's desk with Enderby's rather filthy enamel toilet and little sink and 60s kitchen cabinet. And the set was all in the middle of the room, so that you could walk around it. You could get up close to it. You could see the sort of fake finishing. And then there was another layer that, another temporal layer that was added in, which was the workings of the film itself. So we also added in, and you can see a little bit at the back there, and in that previous one, at the corner here is a very typical gallery vitrine that holds the model of the theatre set. And again here we had some props that were in sort of typical sort of Whitworth display cases. So it was also about bringing the vocabulary of the museum into the display as well, and a nod to the exhibition as being another constructed situation. So the idea, the spaces at Whitworth are quite fluid, and there's at least 2 entrances to each gallery. There's no doors on them, so it's very open. So it's very hard to prescribe a particular route through an exhibition. But we kind of intended for this to be the sort of the way into the film. And then you would walk into this space, which again is, as I said, a very different space. It used to be a roof, and in the late 80s, I think early 90s, it was made into this, it was given a ceiling and made into this large sort of sculpture court, as it was initially sort of intended for. So what you see is behind the screen, there's a brick wall with windows, which is sort of part of the old the gallery, and it kind of looks like a set. It slightly, again, gives this slightly anachronistic feel to your experience of walking around this gallery. So we thought that is a great backdrop for the film, and we used the scale of the space. I put this in so you can get a sense of what it looks like without the sort of dressings that go in presenting a projected film. But you get a sense about 25 metres long. It's very, very high ceilinged. So it takes a lot of, in terms of talking about ways of working, it takes a lot of investment and to just get it to the point where it can present a film. You get dark levels, you get good acoustic kind of treatment. So what we did is, after carpeting and everything, we just, instead of using straight acoustic panels, we used an acoustic curtaining that went all the way around the room. So again, a sort of quite theatrical feel to it. And the films were just projected on a single screen, one after the other, and it didn't really matter which way you encountered them. And then what we found, as I said, it was hard to sort of prescribe a route, but we found that people did tend to go back and forth between the 2 spaces. And I guess part of that was the kind of seeing the films. There was then a sort of renewed intrigue into these objects, into these film sets that they went back to examine. So I'm going to leave that there and look forward to carrying on the discussion. Okay.
Because there are a couple of things that I kind of thought about when you were each speaking. The first one was this thing that you said were about screening as the setting that frames the work, and the difference between seeing the installation No End to Enderby in the Whitworth compared to some of the screenings you showed, Anika, as part of the pilot studies. I just wondered if you wanted to say any more about that.
I guess, I was thinking about it as in the context of it being a setting which naturally just changes depending on where these events happen or have happened historically. And that picture that I didn't explain, but the picture that I put up to start with was one of many examples of the way moving image was kind of sold and framed in its early incarnation. But it was shown at that point, I think it's really interesting because it was shown equally within very elaborate theatrical settings to tents in fairs to back rooms of pubs and bars, and it just struck me that each of those settings, from the beginning of cinema, film has contended with each of these very different kind of settings, which we often think of as something which falls away into the background, but because the room is dark or for whatever other practical reasons. But I think the whole process of sort of entering different types of spaces really affects the nature of the work. So I guess I was referring to this, the screen as something that moves naturally across different backdrops.
And which also makes me think the viewer's experience of that screen obviously moves as well in relation to the different backdrops. And then in the gallery setting, there's, I think, almost the experience can become more fractured or more open as we enter and leave it at whatever point. There's a freedom to when we see the screen compared to like sitting and watching the beginning right through to the end.
And like you said, probably we also show the film clips in separate screens, so you can go to a room and people tend to go back and forth, and they're allowed to go back and forth, and they watch the clips and hear the sounds, and then they go to a scene and they go back again, and I think it's the same thing as or in a similar way that they go back in their memories of a previous screening or a previous setting that they've seen it before. So either they see it for the first time, or they might seen it once or twice or many times. And with the first time we worked with Cinema, I thought it was, for me, it was almost shocking how important some of the film scenes had been to people, that they realized who they were when they saw that film for the first time. So to relive it and re-see it meant so much for people. It was amazing to hear about it. And we tend not to speak about it in sort of real psychological terms, what it means to relive something or see it again, or have different memories from different times we see something. But of course, it's really, really important because we have added so many layers in ourselves in between. So it's sort of, I think this way of showing film show that sort of layering in us what fiction and moving images mean to us, how important they are.
And that was something else that made me think about is the almost the fiction or the fantastical as a tool or a means to renegotiate the present. Or it's, to explore the contemporary moment, which also emerges in your film.
So I deliberately used film as a medium in the Northern Lights film because it has a distance that perhaps digital technologies now don't. I mean, most people probably have a phone in their pocket, and could, as this has been live broadcast, film technologies have changed so much since Super 8 being like a home movie format, or so that deliberate kind of like push away into something that's other makes you look at contemporary Blackpool a little bit differently than if I'd shot it in 4K and running around. So the choice of film as a medium in that film was quite deliberate because it gives it slightly more drift. Like, I think that's the.
I just think, how do you think then, because we live in this moment where everything is mediated, often through the screen, how that affects our relationship to film, or viewing film?
For me, when I've done bits of teaching, and I remember talking to one student who said he'd seen like Chantal Ackerman's Hotel Monterey, which is not particularly easy film to see, but it transpired he'd seen 5 minutes on YouTube, and it's really a film that you really do have to see, at least in the cinema, I would say, and you really have to see the whole thing, which is longer than 5 minutes. So yeah, I think for me, like, the sort of screening event is probably, it feels quite counter to the way that people actually naturally engage with moving images. I don't think the gallery is closer to that, but I think it's probably a little bit closer to in that there's a kind of choice involved. And
it's a funny one with the gallery, because obviously when you tend to go around galleries, go around exhibitions, you tend to do it in your own pace, at your own time. It's unfolding over in a particular way, and then with film, obviously that's taken out of you're slightly restricted your own choice, and it can obviously be a collective experience. It's depending on the film and depending on the setup, like that, for example, when you're just sat looking at a screen. And the film's kind of very heavily dialogue, and so there's a clear storyline in it, so people are focused on it, and it becomes a collective thing. It's very funny, so at times people are laughing, and there's sort of, and then people tend to sort of leave the space and walk around the set, and within these sort of groups, there's other instances where you're showing a film that's like non-narrative, and it's maybe a more more of a visual kind of like installation that's very much about image making and not so much about a sort of story where people tend to have a very different experience. So it's really hard to think about whether a gallery setting creates a certain type of experience. Obviously it's all to do with the film and the sort of the material and everything that goes with it. But in terms of like the mediation of how we're used to seeing everything through a screen, but it's so typically so fast-paced, that kind of thing, that and fleeting and quite momentary, that I think that's the attention that film within a setting requires is something quite different.
And that maybe that attention and that is what feels quite resonant in the Cinema project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I keep coming back to the sort of that how you re-experience something that used to be familiar to you, but you're re-seeing it or adding something to your previous experience. And it could be a totally different room, but you remember something, and sort of adding it to your previous experience.
Does anyone have any questions or would like to add anything to that? Just like a general question I wanted to ask you, is if there's a sort of a particular culture of film in Sweden that maybe like
A particular kind of film?
no, like a particular culture of viewing film, or that is maybe different to say in the UK. I'm just wondering if the cinema would translate, like it would translate in the same way, obviously in a different place.
I definitely think it would translate. It would work in other
But
countries.
not in the same, in a very different way,
Or you have to be, like with all curatorial practices, you have to be really specific and careful how you show something. So you need to know where and for who you're showing it. Like the first Cinema I was speaking about till the second one, we knew that the first audience were more had more knowledge in questions related to queerness, and we knew very little about the audience in Almedalen. We didn't know who would take time to go for 90 minutes or for 3 hours to performance where things are really, all the audience, that they have really strict schedules and they go to different panels and discussions and have schedules for a week, and they and who would come, we didn't know. But we knew that we had to explain some things a little bit more. We needed a little bit more context. So I think for each situation where you make a setting and staging, you need to understand the context and the situation, and perhaps a little bit about previous knowledge in relation to the films. It would be very hard to show films that people wouldn't have a clue about, that they haven't seen. That would be very difficult. Yeah.
The Governor's Guild is anybody walking out of feature-length films in galleries, whereas as soon as the lights go down in a cinema space, or something that looks like a cinema space, I totally obey, and I kind of see the film from start to end, whether it's an abstract kind of 16mm film or big blockbuster. It's funny how disciplined I am with the kind of the lights going down, everybody stop eating popcorn and kind of watch any kind of duration, or give it any.
Do you think that's because it's it's like it's a start? You start at a particular time, you've got this one opportunity to see it. Whereas in the gallery, obviously, you can go back and you can go back and see it. This
Absolutely.
And this idea of in terms of experience, in terms of, I don't know, just thinking now, like what that means in terms of the live. There's stuff about liveness of it, and I don't know if that's the right word, but that's something that's different, I guess, in terms of when you're in a gallery and something's playing on a loop over a period of weeks, sometimes months. How does that obviously change the way the attention you give to it, or how often you watch it, or whether you value it as in the same way. I think that's something that I find a lot in gallery settings in that way.
But it's just interesting, the notion of the event screening, and from when I lived in Leeds, and Will, you were putting on a lot of screenings in various spaces, but it was always kind of pop-up sort of, it starts and it ends, and I would sit and I would be way more patient than to sort of try out different kinds of films that I wasn't used to, and it's interesting, because I'll be like, oh yeah, this great 60-minute film is on that I really want to see, and 10 minutes later I just look what's around the corner and I get distracted, and I'm interested in that, how my patience as a filmmaker, as an artist filmmaker, if someone is invested in the work, it can easily drift just because I don't have to sit in one place in the dark. But then the cinema space to me is a meditative space, and it is like I get tetchy if I've not been to see a film for within the last week or something, and I think film festivals are very different spaces too, where you don't know what you're going to watch and you don't know what kind of work it might be. But it's interesting how I behave as someone who wants someone to watch my work. So I think well, I had the opportunity of being in Blackpool with the Residency, so I was based at Lightworks, but for me it was I used to come here as a kid. I'm sure that's been said thousands of times. Sure. And I've had a chance to be involved with the Grundy over the last 2 years, perhaps, and kind of meet some of you in the room and talk around those kind of things. So I'm interested in acknowledging in the film that it's a very distant kind of misunderstanding or misrepresented, confused take that might be. We were walking around the pier earlier, and you've never been here, and it's a different kind of place. It's got a start, middle and end within 15 minutes, and I think my work's drifted towards the short film format rather than installation or longer durations that I've tried doing.
I was just going to say, because liveness and this sort of concentration or heightened concentration in the cinema space, that's one side of it. And the other side is that screening and event screening, the social bit, and a very sort of lively event is interesting from our point of view, where we see so much is activated by screenings that people arrange in locally, and where they make an effort to understand what people want to see in that specific space. And I think that's really fantastic to participate in, where so much is going on, so much is allowed, because that you could sort of be in a social event and watch film at the same time. So that's another side of it, I think. I agree.
I think that the question of liveness also is sort of in relation to the precarity of the sort of screening situation that I always still feel whenever we've arranged, any kind of screen. You don't know who's going to come, or what the response is going to be like, or I always enter into it not knowing what the outcome will be. And particularly actually with silent films, that precarity is really amplified. I think we were in was the projectionist of a Nathaniel Dorsky film that Chris was at, and so it's a long program of a long suite of films that was over 2.5 hours long, I think, in total. And at each sort of pause in the film, there would be 10 people would leave, and 10 more people would leave until, and this happens so often, you're then left with the 15 who really want to be there, because it is an experience like that is really quite difficult when you're in a sort of quiet, another artist, David Gatton's described as the sort of quiet of the library, rather than everyone needing to be completely quiet. But speaking in that context is quite disruptive, but coughing is okay. There's all sorts of, there's sort of a very precarious situation.
Well, I went to a Fluxus anthology screening in London at Dalston, and I think it was Jonas Meeklis encouraged us to pay for airplanes at the screen, and there was definitely a bar that was encouraged to go to, and I'd always seen these as very reverential things, and actually there's so much playfulness that I'd just not seen, because watched it in a library on monitor as a student. Actually, the communal space of the screening and the various interruptions and interjections, just who's there, just made it more, oh right, suddenly be activated in a different way. It was totally different to watching it on my own, and that's why I will always go to the cinema to watch a film, because you'll bump into whatever after, things will happen that are completely random, and that shared experience of film is something that really, back to my work with the Unravel project, that was always people making the film and then playing it back. That was kind of the most rewarding thing that cameraless film has always done, but working with people and then being able to collectively share the thing that's come out of it was massively educational to me. It just changed me completely. So the audience is always the important bit, with the film. Hopefully.
Maybe that also is a way maybe to end on this shift from the cinematic medium to the cinematic experience that everybody's sort of spoken about this evening. Yes, thank you again for coming. And this has all been recorded, and it is going to be archived on This Is Tomorrow website, and where you can also see all the other talks that are part of this series, or on the project website, which is when we talk about work.co.uk. The next event in the series is at the Whitworth on the 23rd of August, and that's looking at the sort of theme of sound and listening. So a sound artist, Jez Riley Finch, will be presenting some work, as well as Sam Belafonte, who's an artist and a curator, and Calliope Tipsy Colaza, I think you know her name, Colaza, who currently has a project where she's curated an exhibition through like a mixtape, and so they'll all be speaking and talking about their processes of work. Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.